There's a certain kind of win that doesn't get much credit usually, and it's the quiet kind, like pulling a decent meal together when the day didn't go as planned, or finding a way to use up what's in the fridge before grocery day. That's the kind of cooking I come back to again and again. And it's not about going all in or doing everything from scratch. It's just about showing up, using what you've got, and letting that be enough. And I was reminded of that this week because it definitely didn't go as I imagined. And it rarely does, honestly. One of my kids got sick, so everything else just had to adjust. That's why in this video, I'll show you 5 of the dishes we ate as a family of 5 throughout the week. And because of how the weeks went, I assure you all of them are simple, fairly quick, but still made mostly from scratch. We're starting with a sourdough quiche, which is probably one of the most customizable dishes out there. You need a crust, and here I'm making a sourdough version using discard straight from the fridge. And the discard being cold in this case is actually perfect because we want to keep everything cold when making pie crust so it can turn out flaky. Here I'm showing you how little starter I have left, and I'll touch on this later in the video. Okay, so back to the quiche. I really recommend making 2 crusts if you decide to make it, which is what I'm doing here. It's just a little more work, but you end up with a bonus crust for later in the week or later in the month in case you freeze it. I have my go-to sourdough pie crust recipe on my blog, stretchandfolds.com, and I'll link it down below as well for you. It works for both sweet and savory bakes, so when you make it enough times, you remember it and greatly diminish the mental effort that goes into making it, which is honestly what holds me back most of the time when deciding what to make. I have my go-tos, so the things I can make with no thought about what I'm doing at all, and sometimes I really need to push myself to try something new. But it's so worth it because that's something new then becomes a staple with time, usually, and that's how the confidence in the kitchen can grow. On this day, our fridge was nearly empty because we went grocery shopping later in the afternoon. And just a side note, in Europe, it's still pretty customary to have a big lunch and a small dinner. So if you see me cooking what looks like an elaborate meal, you can safely assume it's lunch. This is starting to shift a bit in the bigger cities where work hours are longer, but here in Slovenia, we still cook our main meal in the middle of the day. I know my grandma would be nothing less than offended if you told her you only had a sandwich for lunch. So when it comes to quiche, the base for it is eggs and milk or cream or both. I usually use up whatever cream I have because I don't always have a lot of it, and then top it off with milk. The ratio of milk to cream is basically whatever you want it to be. If you want a richer quiche, you can only use cream. If you want a lighter version, just use milk. The only thing I'd be cautious about is adding skimmed milk. It might not solidify enough for the quiche to have a nice structure. But I've used only full fat milk before and it worked great. I'll link the recipe for the quiche down below as well. I got into the habit of always feeding my sourdough starter after I use it. That's because I used to put it into the fridge because I thought I definitely won't be making anything in the next day or two, but then somehow I always regretted it. Although I usually make things in bulk when I'm baking, for example, I'll make the dough for 2 loaves of bread, or in this case I did 2 pie crusts, somehow I found myself needing some starter and then had to change my plans because I only got scraps of it left. And remember how little starter was left in the jar after I used it for pie crust? Well, that was enough for me to feed it quite a bit of flour and water, and that's where some people go wrong, I think, assuming you always need to feed the starter in a certain ratio, like 1 part of starter, 1 part of flour, 1 part of water. And let me tell you, once you have an established starter, you can easily feed it with lots of flour and water, no ratios required at all. Just be prepared for it to need a little more time to rise if you feed it very well. And on the other side, it will rise much faster if you do feed it approximately, let's say, 1 to 1 to 1 ratio. Okay, back to the quiche again. I follow a simple formula when making quiches. Some kind of vegetable, some kind of strong cheese, and a bit of flavorful meat. I usually use cured meat. Pancetta is my favorite, but as you'll see later in the video, I was saving mine for pasta carbonara later in the week, and I also didn't have any strong cheese I could use, really. And you might be wondering what I did use at this point, and that's a fair question. I simply browned a bunch of onions for flavor and pulled out some frozen broccoli. And that's it. And it worked great. It wasn't quiche Lorraine, but it was a good lunch. And most days, that's what I'm aiming for. I think of cooking from scratch more like building blocks. You learn to make one thing really well, like a sourdough pie crust, and then you build around it. I'm fortunate enough that where I live, we have an amazing selection of pre-made food that's genuinely good quality, and it doesn't even try to market itself as such. There's no flashy packaging, no all-natural branding. Usually it's just a plain label, and then you flip it over, check the ingredients, and they're totally fine. They are usually even great. So I admit, I feel like in Europe it's a bit easier to cook only partly from scratch and use some of the pre-made items from the store and not sacrifice flavor or quality. Something else I've learned, cooking well isn't just about having technical skills. It's about being creative. I used to think I wasn't a creative person, definitely not in the artistic sense, but I've realized that kitchen creativity is different. You're basically just figuring out what tastes good and works with what you've got, and that kind of creativity comes with practice, I believe. You really don't need a talent for it necessarily. No one just starts to cook and is good at it. And it's also not about doing it the right way. It's about using what you have, trusting your guts, and giving yourself grace. You'll see me completely mess up one of the meals in this video, actually, and that's just the way it is sometimes. The next dish we're making is one we eat a lot in our house, and it's creamy porcini chicken with buckwheat. Porcini mushrooms are abundant where I live, and gathering them is a whole family ordeal. We go out in the spring and again in the fall, walking through the woods with baskets, and the kids get all excited. They really treat finding a porcini mushroom like finding treasure, basically. We always come back with more than we can eat fresh, so we freeze a bunch to use throughout the rest of the year, and they do come in handy. That's what I'm using in this recipe, just frozen porcini mushrooms. If you don't have access to porcini, no problem, you can absolutely use another type of mushrooms for this dish. The only thing I'd suggest in that case is to thin the sauce with broth instead of water. Porcini mushrooms have such a strong flavor that I can get away with using water, but with milder mushrooms, it's better to use broth. Seasoning wise, I keep it super simple, just some salt, pepper, some garlic, and thyme. And the sauce itself is pretty basic as well. I'm just sauteing onions, then adding the mushrooms. I make a little space in the pan for the chicken. And then as a side dish, we're making cooked buckwheat. Buckwheat is very common where I live. We use it anywhere where you'd use rice, for example. So if a dish has a good sauce, we'll serve it with buckwheat. We even do risottos with buckwheat instead of rice. Anyways, it's deeply rooted in our food culture, and maybe because it's affordable, nutritious, honestly just really delicious. And that rhymed. If you're willing to try something new next time, cooked buckwheat as a side dish might be an option you should consider. And I'm just making a salad that's my kid's favorite, and it's just thinly sliced cucumbers with some balsamic vinegar, olive oil, and salt. Next up, we had pasta on the menu. This was Wednesday's lunch, and I always like to add a little protein when we do pasta, since it's already pretty carb heavy. For us, a pasta carbonara is what I'd call a crowd pleaser. I don't know anyone who doesn't like it. It kind of fills the same spot as mac and cheese does in the US. It's comforting, it's creamy, it's familiar, and it's honestly really simple, which is probably why it's on rotation so often here. You basically need some kind of cured meat. Pancetta is my favorite, and I was saving it just for this dish, like I mentioned before. I cut it into small pieces and fry them in a cast iron skillet. I love the way cast iron gives a good sear to pretty much anything, but especially to meat. Then I cook some pasta, whatever kind I have on hand, and while that's boiling, I make the sauce. And the sauce is just eggs. I usually use 1 egg per person eating, mix them in a bowl, season with salt and pepper, and that's it. Now, here's the very important part and the heart of this dish. Once the pancetta is crisped up, you want to turn the heat off. That way the pan is warm but not too hot. The only thing that should be really hot is the pasta. Then you immediately pour in the egg mixture and mix quickly. And the idea is that the heat from the pasta gently cooks the eggs just enough to create a silky, creamy sauce, not scrambled, just smooth. That's how it's supposed to go. What actually happened this time is that I forgot to turn off the skillet. So instead of creamy carbonara, we had pasta with scrambled eggs and pancetta. It was a bit of a disaster, if you ask me, but my husband said it was even more delicious than usual. But to be fair, he's a very nice man and would eat literally anything I put in front of him, so I don't think that was the most objective review of the dish. And I almost left this one out of the video because it felt like such a fail. But if I'm here saying that learning to cook from scratch means making mistakes, and it absolutely does, then I figured I should just include the dish that flopped this week too. So here you go. Now, on Thursday, one of my kids got sick, and the other one wasn't feeling great either. So they were more on crackers and water, which meant I was cooking for just me and my husband. And I grabbed that opportunity to make something really vegetable heavy, which is, it's not like my kids don't like vegetables. It's just that when there's a lot of it, they get kind of skeptical of the whole dish. So yeah, I chopped up onions, zucchini, and red bell peppers. I sauteed that in the pan on medium to high heat. I wanted to almost give them a bit of a char. And if I felt they were almost burning, I deglazed the pan with a little bit of water just to make sure everything was moist enough for it not to burn. And once they were sufficiently softened, I added beef strips. We usually get one big cut of meat, and then we make it into some strips, some pieces, and some steaks, and we freeze it. So I used some frozen strips here because I think they work great for fajitas. I seasoned everything with fajita seasoning. We warmed up some tortillas and rolled the filling in, and that was our Thursday lunch. By Friday, I didn't really have a plan, but I always have a freezer full of different meat and fish, so I grabbed some salmon. It just sounded good, and since salmon has so much flavor on its own, I feel like you don't need anything elaborate to make a good meal out of it. So I just served it with some roasted potatoes and vegetables. This kind of side dish is super practical. You can just roast whatever vegetables you've got sitting around that need to be used up. I had some carrots that were starting to look a little sad and some red beets to use. And I know beets aren't the most conventional veggie to serve like this, but our family really likes them. We usually eat them in salads, but we also roast them pretty often. They bring such a nice flavor and a fun pop of color to the plate. This lunch was, again, just for me and my husband, since the kids still weren't feeling great, but luckily they bounced back over the weekend. If cooking from scratch feels overwhelming, you're certainly not alone. The key is to start small. Like I said at the beginning, learn one thing, just one recipe, one technique, one little shift in how you cook or how you plan your meals, and let that be enough for a while. Think of it like building blocks. You stack one skill on top of another, one habit, one good meal, one success at a time, and over time it becomes second nature. And don't expect it to always go smoothly. Sometimes you'll forget to turn off the skillet and end up with scrambled eggs in your carbonara, and that's okay too. Every fail is just another block in the stack, and it's part of how we learn. So give yourself grace, keep showing up, and just keep building. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more videos about sourdough baking, food from scratch, and natural living. I upload new videos every Friday and I hope to see you soon. Bye!